Good morning and welcome to First Unitarian Society. My name is Kelly Crocker and I am one of the ministers here in this community. I'm coming to you from my home as we welcome the Reverend Keith Cron with us virtually today. We will also be joined by the worship team of Linda Warren, Reverend Doug Watkins, Drew Collins, Karin Bringleson, as well as the amazing technical team of Daniel Carnes and Monica Nolan. In this time of physical distance, we are creating space together here for community. And we would like to invite you to keep the community going after our service with our virtual coffee hour. Then please join us at 11:35 for a question and answer session with Reverend Keith around our upcoming Settled Minister search process. Those links will be available to you later in the service. In a moment, we will be lighting our chalice, and I hope you will find a chalice of your own to light perhaps your family's chalice, perhaps a candle, so that the lights of our chalice flames are burning brightly throughout our wider community. We will also be sharing our cares with one another later in the service. If you have something you would like to share with this gathered community, please email it to me, Kelly C, KELLYC @fusmadison.org. I invite you now into a time of silence, a time for a couple of deep breaths together to come fully into this time and space. So make yourself comfortable wherever you are. And we're going to take 3 deep breaths together, with a deep breath on the inhale and a slow breath on the exhale. A deep breath in and a slow breath out. Deep breath in and slowly out. And one more deep breath in and slow out.
I'm the Reverend Doug Watkins, and as we move more deeply into our time of worship, I invite us to experience together the opening words of Annie Dillard. We are here to abet creation and to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. You will see in front of you the chalice lighting words, and as invited, you can now use whatever chalice you are going to have at home as we light ours here with the words of Reverend Marjorie Montgomery. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning. Praise for them springing fresh from the womb. Sweet fall rings new falls on it from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. And is the sunlight, time is the morning, born of the Almighty is for praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of a new day.
Thanks, Drew and Linda. We are really thrilled this morning to be offering a time together with the Reverend Keith Cron. He will speak a little bit later in the service about both a reading and in the sermon itself. But first, we are going to give him a chance to offer something that is another great love of his life, children's literature, as he offers our message for all ages. Welcome, Keith.
Welcome. It is good to be with you all. I am delighted to be here. I'm going to share with you a new favorite story of mine entitled Rita and Ralph's Rotten Day. It's by Carmen Agret Deedy and Pete Oswald. And before I tell you the story of a rotten day, which is kind of like what the world is having at the moment, there are a few movements I want to teach you, because as I'm telling the story, there are some movements that you can do that with your hands to sort of participate in the story. So there are times when they go up the hill. And when I say up the hill, I want you to take your hand like you're going up the hill. And there are times when they go down the hill, and I want you to take your hands like they're going down the hill. And there are the times when the two characters give each other a high five. And when I say high five, give yourself a high five. There are times when they give each other a pinky shake. So when that words are said, I want you to give yourselves a pinky shake. There's times when they do the cha-cha-cha. So when you hear the words cha-cha-cha, do a cha-cha-cha right along with the story. There are times when Rita and Ralph play zombie tag. So pretend to be a zombie and tag yourself. And there are times when they make daisy chains, and you can just practice putting a daisy chain on your head. So I hope you'll do the movements as I do them with the story. And let's have some fun as we hear about how Rita and Ralph deal with their own rotten day. In two little houses on two little hills lived two. Open their doors, they'd step outside, close their doors, and down the hill and up the hill. They'd meet under the apple tree and they'd high five. They'd do a pinky shake. They do a cha-cha-cha. They play zombie tag, and they would make daisy chains. Then one day they played a new game, sticks and stones. Ow! Yelled Rita when she was hit. Uh-oh, Ralph said, and he froze, because this was bad. Really bad. And up the hill, and down the hill, and up the hill. They opened their doors, raced inside, closed the doors, and Rita was mad, and Ralph was sorry. So Ralph opened the door, stepped outside, closed the door, and thought, it's 100 years to Rita's house. But she was his best friend. So Ralph went down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill. and down the hill and up the hill. But the long walk had made Ralph a smidge grumpy. "I'm sorry," he barked, but he didn't sound one bit sorry. So Rita did not open the door. "Grrr," said Ralph, and off he stomped down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill. He opened the door, stepped inside and closed the door, and now Ralph was mad. And Rita was kinda sorry. So she opened the door and stepped outside and closed the door and ran down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill. And as she ran, she thought about Ralph. She thought about that rock, and just thinking about it made her mad all over again. "I want my pine cone back," she said. And Ralph opened the door and closed the door, and as he threw the pine cone out, and that made Rita tromp to get the pine cone, and then she went down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill. She opened her door and marched inside and slammed the door, and now Rita was mad. And Rita was sad. And Ralph was mad. And Ralph was sad. And in the two little houses on the two little hills, no one slept a wink that night. And it had been a rotten day. And just when it seemed that nothing would be right again, it became a new day. And Rita and Ralph opened their doors, stepped outside and closed the doors, and they went down the hill and up the hill and down the hill and up the hill. And they met each other. "I'm sorry," said Rita. "I'm sorrier," said Ralph. And they meant it. And they could tell. So they did a high five. They did a pinky shake. They did the cha-cha-cha. They played zombie tag, and they made daisy chains. Because best friends always find a way to meet in the middle and to start all over again, which is something I hope we all can do when we get to meet again and start over. Thank you.
And now let us sing together hymn number 323, Break Not the Circle.
Break not the circle of unenabling law, where people grow forgiven and forgiving. Break not that circle, make it wider still, till it includes and embraces all. Come wonder at this love that comes to life, where words of freedom are with you were spoken, and people keep no score of wrong and guilt. God will that human hearts remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, till we themselves stand on their feet. See eye to eye with laughter and song.
Thank you, Drew and Linda. Again, we are very pleased to have the Reverend Keith Cron with us this morning. Keith has spent 25 years working with the Unitarian Universalist Association and over a decade working with the Office of Ministerial Transition as the director. But what you really need to know is that Keith spends a great deal of time every year visiting Unitarian Universalist congregations and perhaps knows more about our congregations than anyone. He spends a lot of time talking with our Unitarian Universalist ministers, and so he knows who is out there looking and what sort of the feel of ministry is about these days. And most of all, Keith has a wonderful overview of Unitarian Universalism, and so we're really lucky to have him here today and sharing with us. First, he will share with us a reading by Sarah Moores Campbell entitled Resurrection.
The resurrection isn't the only supernatural event in the Easter story. The disciples of Jesus lived in a world of the supernatural. According to the book of Matthew, when Jesus died, the earth shook and coughed up corpses all over, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After the resurrection of Jesus, these saints showed up in Jerusalem. Well, if just by dying Jesus could empty all of those tombs, maybe his own empty tomb was no marvel. No, in a world where spirits rose up on a regular basis, there had to be something more special going on than just another corpse walking about. This was a resurrection of many souls, not from death, but from deadness. What do I mean by deadness? I mean the things that kept the disciples away from Jesus' funeral: fear, cowardice, lack of conviction and purpose. And I mean those things in our own lives that prevent us from feeling alive. Things like fear, cowardice, a lack of conviction and purpose. And things like loneliness, grief, and boredom that numb us to life. It's as if we let a part of ourselves die and stuff them away in a tomb of the soul. Sometimes that tomb is not such a bad place. It is like a womb, safe and secure, comfortable and predictable. Our tomb life may be nothing more than the safety and comfort of a nice, predictable routine. Or it may be shelter from the world and its problems, a place to hide from the Jesus who called for a world where people actually cared for one another. Whether it's escape or comfort, the time comes for us to roll away that stone and to come out. In the middle of these difficult times, in the middle of our rotten days, I found myself thinking about the time that I was a chaplain at San Francisco General Hospital, serving as a chaplain to AIDS patients and others during a previous pandemic. I was not feeling particularly hopeful on this particular day or ministerial. Seeing the man lying there in the hospital bed was devastating. He was tall, disheveled. He never stopped moving. He was connected to a lot of machinery, and yet he was in a coma, dying from AIDS. Just a couple of hours before, I had read a letter from his father, another minister, although his father was a fundamentalist minister back in the Midwest. The letter began, "Dear brother in Christ, please save my son. He is dying from his sins, and I am praying that you can save him. I know that he probably does not have much time, but I am hoping that by your faith and my faith, we can save him from an eternity of damnation. While he deserves what he has reaped, I am hoping he will find salvation and be freed from his evil ways." The letter then went on to quote some scripture from Leviticus to tell me more about his faith, and he repeated several times how awful his son was. And now I found myself looking at this son, feeling hopeless and wondering where I would find strength. Where do we find that strength, that peace, that hope? Standing next to a hospital bed with a man in a coma who's more restless than you is not something that makes you feel at ease. So I jumped when the nurse put her hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she apologized. "You must be the chaplain. I was hoping you'd stop by. I was wondering if you'd come back in an hour or so. Harold's," and she chose her word carefully, "friend comes every day around 3. He's the one who could use someone to talk to." I nodded and said I would come back. And at a little after 3, I returned, and I found a well-dressed man in a suit by Harold's bed. I guessed he was from India. I introduced myself, and he said his name was Omar. We talked that day for nearly 2 hours, and it would be the beginning of a pattern of conversations between us. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, when I was at the hospital, I would come and find Omar sometime after 3. I learned many things in our conversations. Omar was from Delhi. He was a businessman in the city of San Francisco, coming to the United States for college. And despite the liberal nature of the US and even more liberal nature of San Francisco, he was not out at work. He had simply explained to his boss that he had a hospital situation and could he work from 7 to 2 every day and then leave to go to the hospital. He and Harold had been a couple for 13 years, though the last 3 years they had not been together, he said. And he looked down. This triggered a wonderment in my part, and I asked, "Is that when he started using drugs?" "Yes," Omar replied. "I wanted him to go to rehab, but it was just after his father's last visit that he started using again, and he ran to the streets instead. Sometimes I think living on the streets was the only thing Harold thought he could trust." I learned much about Harold and Omar during these conversations. I learned that Harold's dad was a minister on weekends and a police officer during the week. I also learned that he was on his 10th marriage to his 9th wife. About 2 weeks into our visits, the nurse pulled me aside. She told me they were going to try to talk to Omar, who had the durable power of attorney over Harold. The next week, when we met with the staff, Omar and I talked about Harold and whether or not to pull the life support machines from him. And in one of the most amazing displays of courage and hope that I've ever seen, Omar refused to let the doctors stop the life support on Harold. "Harold's a fighter," he kept saying. "You don't know Harold like I do." He would repeat this many times. With no one happy, the meeting ended and we all left. His father, who'd been calling the critical care unit daily, stopped calling a few weeks later. It seemed it was taking too long for his son to die. It was a month later, one evening after I'd left the hospital, as Omar was talking to Harold, that Harold regained consciousness. So when I walked in 2 days later and Omar said, "This is Keith, he's the chaplain," Harold waved a little finger at me and I nearly fell over. Omar was beaming. A couple of weeks later, they were able to remove the ventilator, and a month later, Harold was transferred from the critical care unit to a regular hospital bed. A month later, for the first time in 5 months, Harold took a step. Omar was there by his side. 3 weeks later, he could walk on his own around the hospital. The doctors began to talk of releasing him. I found myself stopping in one afternoon and talking with Harold before Omar arrived. He now weighed as much as I did, despite being some 8 inches taller. And yet, this was progress. The important things about our feelings is that we have them. Harold and I eventually talked about his feelings and using drugs as a way to escape them. We talked about his feelings for his father, for Omar, for himself. He seemed to understand that his father loved him, but he was confused by how his father expressed it. When I suggested that his father might be struggling with some of the same emotional issues and messages that he was, Harold admitted that he hadn't thought about that before. Of course, we also talked about setting good boundaries with his father. And a month later, Harold got up out of his wheelchair, took Omar's hand, and walked out of the hospital. And I've always wondered what happened to him, to Omar, even to his father. How did they find new life in this new beginning? Who knows what any of them made of it? What do we do when we are given a new opportunity? What does it do for us to finally take notice that we do have no life? Do we cling to our old beliefs like Harold's father did? Or do we realize it's time, a new time with new possibility? From where I sit, I watch the world of religion wrestling with some of these same questions. At this time, do we adapt or do we stay exactly like we've been? How do we look toward a new future without remembering what it was before? Can we honor what has happened? And what will a new future look like after this pandemic diminishes? When a vaccine comes? Will we rush to go back to the way things were? Or will there be a new normal? And what will this mean for our faith, for Unitarian Universalism? I've already seen changes in our congregations and in our ministry in the last month. Having served at the UUA for over 25 years, this is remarkable. My first visit to your congregation was back in 1996. Interweave's convocation was being held there in February. And as I recall, the temperature was about 4 below. The keynote speaker was some small state representative who no one outside of the state had ever heard of. Her name was Tammy Baldwin. She was amazing then. Of the 1,100 congregations across the United States and Canada, at that time, there were less than 50 that were welcoming congregation, and almost none were doing any work on anti-racism. In fact, most people had not heard the term anti-racism in 1996. Our congregations at that time were afraid that a woman minister or a gay minister wouldn't be able to attract families to a congregation and were reluctant to call them. In most of our congregations, if you weren't a humanist, you were closeted about our theology. Today, in 2010, nearly 90% of all UU congregations are officially recognized as welcoming congregations, and most of our congregations have done work on anti-racism and even done white supremacy teach-ins. About 60% of our ministers are female. About a third identify using the word queer, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or trans, and 10% of our ministers are people of color. People are less closeted about their theology, and what people want from congregational life is one that makes a difference in their lives and in the world around us. And the people who show up in our congregation more and more are likely to come from a background where they didn't know religion, as opposed to coming from a place where they're escaping the religion they had been born in. This may change even more after the pandemic subsides, when the proverbial rotten day is over, when we relearn and redefine what human connection means, having learned something, like Rita and Ralph. The future of our faith will be decided by how we honor the past, live in the present, and move in a quickly changing future. How do we live our lives in a world that is constantly changing? Again and again. As you all enter into the ministerial search process, you will have the opportunity to examine yourselves and figure out what you need from a ministry. This is a gift for you over this upcoming year of ministerial search. How our ministry has changed even in this month of the pandemic. The leading comment I hear from ministers across the country is that they have gotten to know their congregants in a very different and more personal way in the last month. Congregants who stayed away are returning to our congregations via video, needing some kind of community. And our ministers have reported hearing kind words from congregants that they hadn't heard in years. It could indeed be a new beginning. And I doubt we can simply just go back to the way things were. Each of us will become a new person, given a chance to walk anew into society, as will you as a congregation and all of our congregations. What will we do with it? What will we do with a new world, a new life? How will we recover and move forward from this? This, I think, is our great question, our great opportunity. And this is the opportunity that you will have to engage in over the upcoming year of ministerial search. How will you find what is new and needed for you as you move forward? And I will tell you, I am both excited and hopeful for our faith as we look to what could be new, because I think we will become stronger people.
We turn now to the giving and receiving of this morning's offering. Because this is an online worship, we invite you to share your offerings online. If you are watching today from the homepage of FUS, you can simply click the box on the right that says Outreach Offering Donations. During this time of uncertainty, of death and despair, in the midst of the new growth of spring, of resurrection, we are forced to face heartbreaking realities, and yet somehow also leave room for hope. When terrible things happen, we can still come together in places like this, even online, to remind ourselves that there is still love, there is still hope, that rebirth is still possible. First Unitarian Society is a community where together we can nurture the tender signs of hope, where those tender shoots grow into full-blown gardens of gratitude for all that is possible. Our donations are symbols of that gratitude, and each week our financial contributions sustain this congregation and our community partners so that we can help hope bloom in the wider world. This week, our community partner is the Muir Gardens. It is the recipient of half of this week's outreach offering. The community garden of John Muir Elementary School is located on Madison's far west side in a low-income neighborhood. Its mission includes helping students gain more passion for nature and sustainability by becoming explorers and scientists in the garden. By studying ecology, weather, and agriculture in an outdoor science lab, students' lives are enriched with experiential, hands-on learning. I invite you to please visit the webpage fusmadison.org/offering and give as generously as you are able.
Thank you, Linda. On this morning, as we gather together in new ways, linked to one another through the delicate tracery of electrons and through the invisible bonds of caring and love, sharing with millions of others the wondering and the fear and the uncertainty of this time. May each of us stay well and whole. May each of us find our ground of strength and clarity. May each of us let our hearts break open to new ways of caring for our neighbor and ourselves. May each of us know, even if we are alone, that we are held in a great embrace of love. This week, we share Patty's gratitude that her cancer is slow growing. And because of this, her surgery has been postponed until it is safer for her to be at the hospital. We also share her deep gratitude for all the hard working staff of UW Hospital. We share Lori's gratitude for this community and all that is being done to preserve it in these times. Georgia and Courtney and family send a very happy birthday and much love to Bob, and they are grateful they were able to celebrate virtually. They would also like to remember and honor the long and adventurous life of Peggy Taylor, who recently passed away. Jody shares that they were originally scheduled to have a memorial service for JJ's mother in Illinois last weekend. And that, of course, was canceled. JJ's mother died in January, and it is likely they will not reschedule the service. Jody and JJ hope that this congregation will celebrate her beautiful life with them in your hearts. The Woodward family share their gratitude to be out of quarantine, and also their gratitude to friends and family who made it more manageable following their truncated adventures in the United Kingdom. Elizabeth shares the memory of her family's dear friend, Carol Dietmeyer, who passed away this week. She's also holding in her heart all who are grieving the deep and tragic loss of Dr. Beth Potter and Robin Curry. John shares his concerns for his niece, Toby, a nurse serving in one of the COVID-19 wards at Morristown Hospital in New Jersey. Ed shares his 5-year-old daughter Cleo's joy that the plant she started in her religious education class is still going strong. Samantha is seeking strength as she starts a new job, her first factory job, helping to assemble ventilators. She hopes this will be a help to those who are sick and suffering. And Nancy is finding joy in the cacophony of morning birdsong, in intricate sidewalk chalk art, and in long chalk hopscotches, some winding around the block. She finds joy in the happy voices of young children playing in their yards. I light this candle for all the joys, the sorrows, the gratitude, the worries, the fears that were spoken, and all those that we each hold in our hearts. May we be in silence for a moment together as we each hold all those that are living there that remain unspoken. Spirit of life and of love, in the slow days ahead, may we remember this moment where we felt the warm embrace of community. May we remember that we are held in this embrace now and always. May we remember, may we give thanks, and may we love. Blessed be, and amen.
And a happy hello to everybody. I'm Steve Goldberg, a proud, intellectually gifted member of First Unitarian Society. And you have the great pleasure of hearing me make a couple announcements as we head into the home stretch of this online service. My first announcement is that I miss all of you. I miss seeing you. I miss understanding how you're feeling and joking and smiling and laughing with each other, but we'll have a chance to experience that again, I'm sure. Meanwhile, we look forward to seeing many of you at the virtual coffee hour after the service. Instructions on how to access that coffee hour are on the screen for you, or should be. In addition, we look forward to seeing many of you at the Q&A session with Reverend Keith at 11:35 this morning. Again, 11:35 a.m. for the Q&A session with Reverend Keith to answer your questions about the transition here at FUS. And my last announcement is related to the global health crisis, the global health crisis that is still here. But we need to remember that FUS is also still here, still adding value and still connecting people in the organization. In fact, more than 700 viewers tune in to this online service every Sunday now. That's a large number and it keeps growing. We're also experiencing more participation in the virtual coffee hour, as well as the community outreach offering. And I heard a story the other day about how dozens and dozens of kids in our children's religious education program sent handwritten notes to older members of the congregation saying how much they missed seeing them at service. So in that spirit of connectivity and that spirit of generosity, we're continuing our stewardship campaign. We've decided to expand it to 2 more months. It was supposed to end the final weekend of March, but for obvious reasons, we've decided to extend the season of generosity 2 more months, ending in the final weekend of May. And we're making it easy for you to pledge online. All you need to do is go to the FUS website and find the stewardship campaign link. And within that link, you'll find instructions on how to pledge online. We experienced some really good growth in the pledging, but we need more in order to keep providing the value that means so much to everybody here at FUS. That's the end of the announcements. Thanks very much for joining us. And it's been fun to imagine how all of you look at home as you enjoy this service online.
And now let us sing together hymn number 116, I'm on my way.
On my way to the freedom land. I'm on my way to the freedom land. I'm on my way to the freedom land. I'm on my way, great God, on my way. I asked my sister, come go with me. I asked my sister, come go with me. I asked my sister, come go with me. I'm on my way, great God, on my way. I asked my brother, come go with me. I asked my brother, come go with me. I asked my brother, come go with me. I'm on my way, great God, on my way. If they say no, I'll go anyhow. 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 I'm on my way, great God, on my way. On my way, and I won't turn back. 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 I'm on my way, great God, on my way.
As we prepare now to end our service, our closing words are from Mary Oliver. To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go. I invite you to extinguish your chalice at home as we extinguish our chalice. And as we do so, we do not extinguish the light of every human life that gives to this world part of its magic and wonder. We do not extinguish the warmth of our connection that crosses over the separation, or the fire of us working together in this time and in this place. We'll now receive one more gift together of music before we end our worship.